Hello and welcome to another installment of Biology in the Basement with your host, Mr. Andraco. Thank you. As you can see, I've lost my mind. Um, I miss all of you, so I'm just pretending that you're here now. That's the state of my mental status, in case you were wondering. Also, Mr. Andraco's classroom has been on headwear segments, so this attire actually represents both of my sons. I've got Sam's Tavern and Restaurant as my hat, and I've got Dell's Stereo and Sound as my t-shirt today. So I'm repping both of my kids today. That's what the theme is, I guess we'll call it, is my blood. Okay, so let's have a fact of the day so we can get started with an actual lab we're going to do. And this fact of the day goes out to my mother, who is an avid tennis player, forever got me into it, and also one of my only viewers. My hope is that your moms will still be watching your YouTube videos when you're 43 years old and love you as much as my mom loves me. Okay, pandering to mothers over. Here's your fact of the day. Wimbledon, a tennis tournament in England, has been paying insurance, specifically pandemic insurance. They've been paying $2 million a year in pandemic insurance for the last 17 years, totaling $34 million in payments for pandemic insurance. Turns out they just canceled Wimbledon. And you know what their insurance policy just sent them? A check for $141 million. So Wimbledon was prepared for a potential pandemic, unlike many countries. So there's your fact of the day. Yeah, oh yeah. That was actually more of a, I just burned somebody. Okay, moving on. We are going to do a lab, which will be found on page L145 in your yellow books. Okay, so L145 in your yellow books, the title is Blood Diseases Lab. I'll give you some time to find the page and get your books out. Okay, hopefully you found your yellow books and got to the Blood Diseases Lab on L145. Now, normally when we start a lab, right, we have a discussion where I start asking a whole bunch of questions, and we have, usually in the form of a warm-up question, and we have it as our segue to get started on a lab. So since it's just me, maybe I'll do a little performance of how this would go. Is step one on the board would be what is blood and what are the four major components. And then at the bottom, the question would be what is a diagnosis, as you can see as one of your key words. And so usually the conversation would go something like, hey, what are the parts of the blood, somebody? And then a student, would raise his hand and they would say, oh, well, we have red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, and platelets. And I would say, all right, very good job, student. And then I would say, hey, tell me what the function is of the each component. Well, red blood cells carry oxygen and CO2 to the lungs. White blood cells are the ones that fight pathogens in the blood. The platelets, those are the red blood cell fragments that they help in the clotting of blood. That's right. And plasma is the liquid stuff, right? Where all the other things are dissolved in, right? And then I would pull this up and say, yep, you're right. And then we would review why does your blood look like this? And you would say, oh, because it's been spun in a centrifuge, right? And so we would talk about the parts of blood, and then we would get into what is a diagnosis. And I would say, hey, what is a diagnosis? And then somebody, sorry, I'm in student mode. Somebody raises their hand and they're like, it's when a doctor tells you that you have something. And then, of course, I say, well, how do you know that you have something? How does a doctor know? Does he just look at you and say, you've got hepatitis? You know, what does he do? Well, he, runs some tests, like blood tests or urine tests or something like that. And I'll say, right, okay, so that's what a doctor does. You know, the doctor will take a whole bunch of tests. And then what does he do? How does that give him a diagnosis? They just look at the blood or the urine sample and they say, boom, this guy has this. Well, yeah, they just look at the sample and then they know they have a condition. How do you know that they have a condition? Because they looked at the sample. How do they know that the sample is bad? Because they know. Sometimes there's a pause, a long pause in this part. And I try not to feed you the answer. Hopefully by now you're saying that they look at a normal blood sample. They look at a control, right? Because they have to have something to compare it to. Okay, that is what a good scientist does, right? You got to collect the data, but you also have to have a control. You have to have something to compare the your individual results to. So, what a diagnosis is, since you're going to have to define this, is, right, identifying a condition after comparing a sample to what the normal sample should be, right? When you guys go and get a blood test, or you've seen your parents' blood tests or whatever, right? They have a whole list. Here is all the things that we found in your blood. And then they give you, here is the range of what your numbers should fall into. And if your numbers don't fall into those things, they say, hey, well, maybe we should look into why those numbers are off. And so that's what you guys are going to simply do in this lab. It is very simple and straightforward. After you define your other keywords that you already know, you are simply going to fill in your data table. The first one on L145 is what a normal blood sample will look like. Okay? The other 5 samples found on L146 will be the different figures that you will put. Now you will count the number of red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, or red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And then you will rank them in order of 1, 2, and 3, meaning 1 is the most, 2 is the fewest, right? So when you look at normal blood, right, just to help you, right, normal blood, these white circles are technically the red blood cells. The little black flecks are the platelets, and the big white circles with the black blobs in them, those are white blood cells. And as you can see, rank number 1 would be red blood cells. That's where there's the most of. And then the next one would be the 15 or whatever platelets. They would get a rank of 2. And the least amount of whatever is in there would be ranked 3, and that in your normal blood would be white blood cells. So you will do each of the counting of the blood samples. Sorry about figure 4 there. That's going to take an extra minute. Luckily you got time. So you'll just figure out all of the numbers and all of the ranks, and then down here you will match up what each person has. Okay, so as you can see down here, they have the different scenarios, and you will write their conditions in each of these boxes below, right? One of them has leukemia. One of them has, my favorite one, cytopenia purpurea, as it's called. And, you know, there's a few others, anemia and stuff like that. And so you will write each one of those as they correspond with the data that you have collected. And good old labs don't go unfinished without a whole bunch of questions. Luckily, these are the only questions you have to answer. There are no lab write-ups, and you don't have to answer any other questions besides these on the back. So this should be a simple, straightforward lab, right? We don't need lab materials for it. Just define the front, use figure 1 to fill out figure 1, and all the rest of these following. Use this information to make the diagnoses at the bottom and answer the questions. Simple as that. Okay, so this is your Friday assignment. So you can work on this today, over the weekend, and this will be the last assignment of the marking period. And then we switch to the 0, 2, 3 system. So get this one done and to me by Tuesday, please, because that's when we'll close the books and print the grades for that, and then switch to the new system. Okay, signing off, everybody. Have a good one.